Hello there! So, what do you do when you're retired? I suggest you start making YouTube videos. I started making this channel, Life in the 1800s Newspapers, and I liked it so much that I started a second channel, Life in the 1900s Newspapers. If you get a minute, I'd appreciate it if you would check out this second channel. Making videos is easy. I just do it on my iPad using the iMovie app that came with the iPad. We will be reading a newspaper that's 152 years old, called the Star and Sentinel from Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, dated Friday, April 28, 1871. When I read the newspaper, it is the actual word that is printed in the newspaper, but I add my own choice of photos and video clips, which may not be the same as the ones mentioned in the newspaper or the same time period. But this fellow was from 1870s. So sometimes I research and can actually find the same place, object, person, and time period that was mentioned in the newspaper. I'm also very excited to tell you that this background music was also from the 1800s. We'll start with The Murder in the Tunnel, an exciting story that happened on a train. A story from Gray. Now, old fellow, out with it. You've got an hour before your train starts, and you haven't yarned to us in an age. Yes, a story from Gray. Such were the exclamations that met the individual of that name as he entered the cozy conductor's room of the L&G Railroad. "Well, boys, I'm pretty near drained of my adventures," said Gray. "But if I haven't told you it before, I don't mind letting you hear about an incident that happened to me out west before I came among you boys here. Did I ever tell you of the murder in the tunnel? Well then, here goes. You see, when I was in the old W&V line in Missouri, I ran what was known as the Drovers Express going west, which had that name because the drovers would come to market with their cattle, and they always went with the beasts on the freight train. One night, I had an unusually rough crowd aboard. They were generally rough enough, but this time they were worse than usual. One or two small fights had begun, one in particular between a tall Kentuckian and a Missourian, having threatened to lead to serious consequences, both men having drawn their knives. Their friends had, however, separated them and had placed them in different parts of the car. There being more stops to make, I curled myself up in a chair in the baggage car for a nap and dozed comfortably, till awakened by the rattle of the bell rope overhead and the whistle of the engine calling for the brakes to be put down. Catching up my lantern, I opened the car door and looked out, but found nothing but darkness the most intense. The train having stopped, I got off and ran to the engine, asking the engineer in a half-asleep manner where we were and why he had stopped. "We're in the Grover Tunnel," he replied, and I stopped because the bell rope was pulled. By the time my brakeman had been around the outside of the train and finding all the couplings right and not discovering anything wrong externally, I gave the signal to go ahead. Then I started through the train to see who had pulled the bell rope. Most of the passengers were asleep in the forward cars as we passed through, but some few were awake and told me that the pulling of the bell came from behind, from some of the rear cars. Rickman and I crossed onto the platform of the last car. After unlocking the door, we essayed to push it open, but some weight against it prevented us. Against the bottom of the door lay the Kentuckian, his body twisted. He was dead. And from looking at his throat, I could see a thin blue line. His neck had been broken. It was then remembered the animosity between him and the Missourian, and in the end, the Missourian was arrested. About 3 weeks later, I was on the same train. There weren't any drovers this time, but there was a tall, thin Yankee. And when we were in that same spot in the tunnel, the bell rope was pulled. The train screeched to a stop, and I sprang up and ran to the last car on the train. Reaching it, I found the Yankee sitting back in his seat and hoisting his hand to his throat while he gasped for breath. 1 or 2 passengers were attempting to be of some use to him, but he could only moan and hold tightly to his throat. At last he recovered sufficiently to take his hand away, and I saw that same livid blue mark in exactly the same position as that on the neck of the Kentuckian. He said he had been asleep and was awakened by the train entering the tunnel. Half asleep and awake, he stepped into the car door and looking out, or tried to look out through the door window. Suddenly, without warning, he felt a rope slip around his throat, and at that moment, the engine giving a jerk, he was thrown violently into a corner of the car. The mystery was solved at last. The train entered the tunnel at a slow rate of speed and without the use of steam, the grate at the entrance forcing the cars together and giving them sufficient headway. At this time, the bell rope, which of course has to be much longer than the length of the train when the cars are close together to allow of sufficient length when they were drawn out, hung loosely and the festoons through the car, and both the Kentuckian and the Yankee, both being tall men, standing just where the longest festoon would be, near the forward door, the rope slipped under their chins, and as the engineer suddenly put on steam, the jerk threw them from their feet, and as in the case of the Kentuckian, who must in his drunkenness have gone to the door for some purpose, was sufficient enough to break his neck and cause death. I carried myself to the doomed Missourian, the news of his pardon for a crime, by the way, he had never committed. But such is the justice of our laws, and he joyfully accepted that solution of the mystery. Each Christmas, I receive from him the best and fattest of his drove, and he writes me frequently, congratulating himself on his escape from the gallows. A man sentenced to be hung was visited by his wife, who said, "My dear, would you like to have the children see you executed?" "No," he replied. "That's just like you," said she. "You never want the children to have any kind of enjoyment." Advantages of taking a paper. I knew 2 friends as much alike as ever you saw 2 stumps, and no phrenologist could find a difference in their bumps. One took a paper, and his life was happier than a king's. His children all could read and write and talk of men and things. The other took no paper, and while strolling through the wood, a tree fell down upon his crown and killed him, as it should. Had he been reading of the news at home like neighbor Jim, all but a cent this accident had not befallen him. A fuss in the family. Well, I guess there's a row over to our house. What on earth's the matter, you little sarpint? Why, Dad's got drunk, Mother's washing, Sal's got married and run away with the spoons, Seth has swallowed a pin, and Louis looked at Aurora Borealis till he got the delirious trembling angels. And that ain't all nuther. What else upon the earth? Why, Rose split the batter pot and broke all the pancakes, and one of the Maltese kittens has got her head into the molasses cup and can't get it out, and oh, how hungry I am. Shut up. A Cockney tourist met with a Scotch lass going barefoot towards Glasgow. "Lassie," said he, "I should like to know if all the people in this part go barefooted." "Part of 'em do, and the rest of 'em mind their own business," was the rather settling reply. A little boy had great liking for the water. His mother told him not to go to the wharves or near the water. "For, Freddie, if you should get drowned, we should never know what became of you." "Oh, yes, you would, 'cause it would be in the papers." Jeremiah Culp, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, undertaker and paper hanger, is prepared to furnish on short notice and reasonable terms coffins of all styles. Coopering. Peter Culp has commenced the coopering business in all its branches at his residence on the Mummasburg Road at the end of Carlisle Street, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. The public can always have made to order all kinds of styles of meat vessels, kraut stands, pickle stands, tubs, and flour barrels. Gunsmithing. Battlefield relics. Canes, shells, bullets. E. Woodward would respectfully call the attention of the public to his large assortment of relics gathered on the Gettysburg battlefield. Gunsmithing attended to with promptness and all work warranted. Give us a call at our place of business on Carlisle Street, McNaughey Hall, near the depot, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Blacksmithing. B.G. Holabaugh has opened a blacksmith shop on Washington Street, next door to Kritzman's carpenter shop, and is prepared to do all kinds of blacksmithing. Repairing of all kinds. Give us a call.